Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today I have Jill Kushner Bishop on the line, and she is founder and CEO over at Multilingual Connections. Jill, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Adam. Happy to be here.
All right, Jill. So I'm excited to have you on today. I know you're coming to us today out of Chicago. You have a Chicago-based agency. I'm from the Midwest. I love bringing the Midwest on the show. So I'm excited to have you on and get more into multilingual connections and also really how your company is helping to create global connections. So we'll get into that, of course. But before we do, we'll start this episode the way that we start them all with our Mission Matters Minute. So, Jill, we at Mission Matters, we amplify stories for entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. That's our mission. Jill, what mission matters to you?
To me and my team at Multilingual Connections, it's all about creating connections. That is what we do, although that looks different for different clients. So for some people, they're looking to create connections with a local audience. They're a hospital or a restaurant or a non-for-profit that needs to communicate with a diverse audience. For others, they're looking to grow their business globally, and so they're looking for translation or transcription or subtitling and voiceover for their marketing content to be able to resonate with global audiences. So it's all about creating connections.
Mm. So how did you originally get into this business? Like what drew you to this industry?
Yeah, well, I am a linguistic anthropologist by background. So I went on to study language and culture and how people use language. And then I was lucky enough to get an opportunity at Chipotle Mexican Grill overseeing language and culture programs for about 130 restaurants, so about 1,000 employees who were largely Spanish speaking. We were working on helping improve their English skills so that they could give better customer service and grow within their roles. And from there, it kind of sparked in me the idea of creating something on my own, building on that. And so I started my business 18 years ago, initially with a plan of doing English and Spanish classes for restaurants and hotels. And then very quickly we started doing translation. A few years later, transcription. A few years later, subtitling and voiceover. And it's just kind of evolved over time. And now we even do multilingual moderation for market research.
Wow. I want to stay in the early years for a little bit longer, and I know you've been in business a long time, but I want to take you back because there's a lot of, entrepreneurs and executives and business owners that are listening, and some of them are, kind of going through transition. Some are thinking about starting a business or going the entrepreneurship route. If I could take you back to the beginning, like how was that like to go out and kind of strike out on your own and hang your shingle and start the company? Like how was that? Does that transition?
Yeah, daunting, scary, all of that. I won't pretend it wasn't. Yeah. I found a bank account we had forgotten about with $500, and I thought, okay, I've got $500. I've got a flip phone, a laptop, the yellow pages, and let's just give it a shot. And so,
wow.
And I was lucky that my husband had a job so that, we figured let's try for 6 months and see if it has legs. And so we had a backup plan or at least some cushion. But it was, it was exciting to think about what might be professionally and personally fulfilling for me, what the need in the market was, how I could create an offering that would really resonate with people and with HR directors, with so many people who are working with multilingual speakers who are super talented employees, but they realized that the language barrier was really creating an obstacle for their growth. And so it was exciting, but it was certainly not all puppies and rainbows at the beginning, nor has it been in these 18 years. There's a challenge. There's always challenges that come up.
Of course. And obviously hindsight's, 2020, so that's a given. But if you could go back to that, that Jill that was just getting started and just, sitting there with that flip phone and like, okay, let's do this. Like what kind of things would you tell her?
Yeah, I would say, hey, Jill, why don't you take a business class? It might be helpful.
That's great.
And then I would also
by the way, that would be my advice to the young Adam, by the way. Me too.
Okay,
go ahead.
Good. Nice. Now it's the kind of thing that was just never on my mind, never a thought.
Same.
But also that when things are telling you, when the business is telling you it's time to pivot, don't wait too long to pivot. And so along the road, I had opened a language school for adults and for children, separate from the translation services and the B2B language training that we were doing in workplace. And I loved it, and it was so fulfilling, but it was not financially viable. And I didn't care because I wanted to do it. And I felt like, well, the other services are doing okay, so I'll just keep it going, and maybe it'll work. But it wasn't going to work. And I knew that eventually. And I finally came to terms with that and closed the language training. And for a long time, I said I didn't want to run just a translation agency. If I couldn't see people come into my space and learn language and get so excited about it and apply it the very next day with their family or with their neighbors or at work, I didn't want to do it. And then I really rethought that and realized that running a great company and switching my lens of what it means to create connections, and that it might not be as immediate to me. I might not see it or feel it, but my clients were going to see it and feel it. And now I love it. And I look back periodically, and it kind of tugs at my heartstrings, but I know that it was the right business decision, and it just took a while for me to emotionally catch up to what I intellectually knew.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I always I like for especially the young entrepreneurs or those that are maybe going through it right now to know they are not alone.
Right.
We all have our
Absolutely.
ups and downs, and that's not and I feel like the more people that come on our show and just in general create content, whatever show, right? That validates that and lets people know that we're all connected in one way or another. It's just for the greater good, in my opinion.
Right.
But,
and your point, Adam, about being not being alone, I think it's really important also to seek out other business owners at similar stages and at more advanced stages, and those types of peer groups, whether it's formal or informal, can be invaluable. So even if it's a totally different business than the one you're running, there's so many similarities in the daily struggles and decisions. And so being able to share experience and get support can be so valuable.
Yeah. Let's shift the topic a little bit. I want to go a little bit further into what you're doing over at Multilingual Connections. So, first off, maybe tell us a little bit more about the company. I know you mentioned some of the services and translation, but really, how does your company help create these global connections we're talking about?
Sure. So we support over 75 languages. We are about 25 people. We were originally headquartered in Chicago, and our headquarters are still there, but there are just fewer heads in the quarters. We have most of our people are located outside the world. So we've got a bunch in Turkey and Egypt, South Korea, Guatemala, Mexico, other regions around the world, and that has been great for finding the best people, and not just the best people that happen to work in Chicago. We've got a lot of internal language and cultural expertise and just a diversity of backgrounds and experiences that have really made us a stronger company. But we offer a variety of different services. So the most typical is a translation. So somebody contacts us and they have an employee handbook or a website or marketing materials that need to be translated from English, for example, into maybe 5 languages or maybe just 1 language. And so we do the translation of that type of written documentation. We do audio and video transcription of everything from focus groups and interviews to jail phone calls and wiretaps. Then we do voiceover and subtitling of video content, e-learning modules, documentary footage. And I mentioned that we started doing bilingual moderation. So we work with a lot of market research and user research companies. And so we have experienced researchers that are fluent in other languages that can facilitate a focus group or help with a research project, not just from the language perspective, but from the cultural perspective as well. So it's really every day is totally different, and each client comes to us with very different needs, but a similar end goal in mind.
So when we talk about, I don't want to assume, because I've never used a translation service. Maybe one day. I mean, we publish a lot of books. We've especially our business leaders book series, we published over 300 authors, and I've always contemplated, what does it look like to translate a book or something else? So I guess broadly speaking, what's the difference between a translator and just somebody who's bilingual? How does that play out?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and we have that question a lot. And so obviously to be a translator, you need to be bilingual, but just because you're bilingual doesn't mean you're qualified to be a translator. And so translators, it's a skill. It's something that people study and do for years and years to really hone their craft. And so it's not just about knowing the one-for-one correlation between one word in one language and one in the other. It's being able to render it in a way that is both linguistically and culturally resonant with the audience. When something's translated, you want it to sound like it was originally written in that target language and not that it was kind of an awkward force fitting of some content. In English, we use a lot of sports metaphors, and obviously when you're translating, those sports metaphors are not going to work. And so coming up with something that's different, but it's also being a good writer, knowing the different orthographic norms. We were doing Spanish translations for a company here in Chicago, and we got feedback from the client that everything was great, but we forgot to capitalize the days of the weeks and the months in Spanish, and so they just fixed it, and now it's fine. And what they didn't know is that their internal person that told them that didn't know that in Spanish you don't capitalize the days of the week and the months. And so if you're not familiar with the way that the language is written and you haven't been educated in that country, you don't know what you don't know. And then on the other hand, with the way that things are changing so quickly and language is constantly evolving, think about the way that 16-year-olds talk now versus somebody my age who's not 16 anymore. Language is changing all the time, and you want to make sure that whoever's translating has their finger on the pulse of language and how people actually are using language, especially around topics like gender inclusiveness. How do you translate that from one language to another that's going to be appropriate for that audience? And so there's a lot of experience and skill that goes into translating. So some native speakers can do a great job doing that, but not all native speakers can. So that's really the difference, if that makes sense.
It does. And as I mentioned earlier, so a lot of business owners, a lot of executives listen to this call, and I know some of them have, just like myself, their interest has been piqued in terms of like, we've always thought about like, what does it look like to maybe have some of our content or some of our materials in another language? For businesses looking to expand globally, like how do you kind of recommend they address the language piece of it?
Sure. So it's often challenging when people often feel kind of overwhelmed, like there's too many items on the menu, they don't know what they're hungry for, they can't choose. So if they've got multiple languages or multiple regions they're working in, they've got all kinds of materials and they don't even know where to start. And so sometimes it makes sense to do it all, but oftentimes it just makes sense to prioritize and think, what's the number one market that you really want to start with? So pick one region. There's a lot of learning that happens along the way in this process. Even if on the translation side, that's kind of the easy part. It's the workflows and what happens after the translation on the client side. So pick one region that you want to translate into, and then pick some of your highest priority, most visible content that you want to focus on. And let's start with that and get the experience, try to figure out, okay, yeah, we translated this document, but do you have desktop publishing, or do you want us to do that? How are you going to get it out there? Do you need people who speak the language on your side so that, if you've got it all translated, but what if somebody reads it and then contacts you and nobody in your company speaks the language to then do the customer service or the sales? So you want to kind of think through all the different steps in that process. But I think starting small makes sense. Prove some ROI, get your experience with it, and then gradually roll it out. I never want people to feel like they have to do it all at once. That's not always the best option, even if ultimately their goal will be to have everything in 5 or 7 languages.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think what you said about like the menu of options or how many things they want to do and like all of this piece of it, like that can be overwhelming. I can see that. But it sounds to me though, like if you're working with, the right company and if you're working with somebody that maybe has been through this, that it becomes a little bit more like manageable. Like, can you maybe speak a little bit on like what it's like to work with your company and kind of like through that process? Because I'm guessing that's part of what you're advising clients on, is kind of not just like I send it to them and okay, it's done, but maybe some of those that haven't done it, like I'm guessing that's probably a pretty good market for you as well, considering your experience, 18 years in the business. I mean, yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. And it's kind of like, remodeling your kitchen. You can find somebody to do the tile and do the cabinets and do the paint and all of that, but there's risk. You don't know how to evaluate quality. You want it's somebody's full-time job.
They're going to get done.
Yeah, exactly. And in the right order. And so, there are freelance linguists available, and you can use machine translation to some degree to help get you part of the way. But those are decisions that if you don't know this business, you have to be really careful because you can make some really serious mistakes. And so for us, we start by evaluating the content, understanding what the goals of the project are. What's your tone? Do you have any style guides? Do you have any glossaries? Any kind of consistency? Do you have anything going in that you want us to keep in mind? Then we're going to think about who is the right linguist for this. Who has the native language, the regional language, so Spanish for Spain versus Latin America, for example, who has the industry expertise. So if you're doing marketing versus medical or technical, those would likely be 3 different translators. And then what kind of technology, what kind of computer-assisted translation tools are necessary to help ensure that there's consistency and efficiency across the process. And that's not machine translation, it's translation productivity tools. And then who's going to edit the translation to make sure that it's accurate and that it's proofed and polished. So you want 2 sets of eyes on this. And then is everything formatted? And then sending it back. And then if there's feedback, how do we incorporate the feedback and track it? And so there are many, many, many steps along the way. And so that's what we help usher people through that process and help them know what to expect and give us as much as possible from the get-go so that we can ensure that what they get in return fits exactly what their needs are.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Jill, I'll tell you, it has been great having you on the show today, and what a wonderful story of starting at your kitchen table with the flip phone and the phone book and figuring it out, and to growing to pivoting to it's just to now 75 different languages, I believe you said, and a full array of capabilities that are really helping many businesses out there connect globally and to get their content out, to get their reach out, and to really just do it the way it's supposed to be done. So great having you on. And Jill, that being said, if somebody's listening and they want more information or to connect with you and your team, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. And if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about a potential project, you can find us at multilingualconnections.com.
Fantastic. And my team will put all that information, put the website address and all that good stuff in the show notes so that our audience can just click on the link and head right on over. And speaking of the audience, if this is your first time with Mission Matters or engaging or listening to an episode, what about bringing on business owners, entrepreneurs, and executives and having them share their mission, the reason behind their mission, really, what gets them up in the morning, gets them fired up to go out there and to make a difference. If that's the type of content that sounds interesting or fun or exciting to you, we welcome you. Hit that subscribe button because we have many more mission-based individuals coming up on the line, and we don't want you to miss a thing. And Jill, really, again, it has been a pleasure. Until the next time, thanks again.
Thank you so much, Adam. Take care.